So I moved to New York first, to start there. I moved in 2015, got my work visa and oh, got my work visa and I moved to New York and I was shooting for 3 years, living there. And in 2018, the visa expired and, it was like, okay, well, I have to go home now. So I came back to Nevis and it was at first, in some ways, it was like me coming back kicking and screaming within myself, like, how am I going to go forward as a creative? Even the thought of, would I still be going forward as a photographer? Um, and it turned out to be one of the best things that happened for me because I had to really dig deeper within myself to figure out what I wanted to say and what I wanted to shoot and how I wanted to shoot going forward. I no longer had access to, models and like hair and makeup and stuff like that. And it really gave me, because I was in that situation, I had to push past like a comfort zone and go into, like, okay, I'm going to keep shooting and somehow I'm going to do something. So that would have been like the start of that sort of mindset, like the shift.
And you were a fashion photographer before, and I've heard you talk so beautifully about your shift into documentary work and how that sort of
Mm-hmm.
built this foundation for you of
Mm-hmm.
a sort of ground force in your life. And can you talk a little bit
Right.
about that shift? And
Yeah.
yeah.
I think like I've never really felt like a fashion photographer per se. I mean, I sort of came into a knowing about photography through fashion. First I modeled and stuff like that. So that's how, being from Nevis, I would have become aware of photography first and foremost. And it happened to be through fashion because I would have had like connections in that world. Um, but like deep down, I never felt really like a fashion photographer. When I think of like a fashion photographer, I think of like the greats like Avedon and like Urban Pen and like Stephen Meisel and these guys who really, the focus of what they do is like the clothing. But for me now, I think my sort of focus has always been like, okay, who is this person? Like, I want to know more about this person. I want to see them and stuff like that. So that has always been like my underlying thing. But it just so happens I was in like a fashion space and shooting models. So if that makes me a fashion photographer, okay. But I think as my, being self-taught and through the process of really looking at pictures and going on YouTube and getting my first camera and learning the basics and going from that point, um, looking at pictures and looking not just at fashion photography, but looking at, like documentary, looking at fine art and stuff like that, the more I looked at things that weren't in a fashion space, the more I sort of saw fashion, if that makes sense. Like I could look at like Steve McCurry is his name, I think, with the portrait of the Afghan girl, for instance, and I could see fashion there, but then that's not really a fashion picture. So between the time of like 2015 to 2018, I was sort of like very much finding my identity, I guess, as a photographer. And also towards the end of when I was now forced to strip away because I was at home and I didn't have access to these things that would sort of hold up that idea of, a fashion photograph. I had to then really sit with myself and, just make pictures and do it in a free sense without putting myself into a label or into a box and saying like, okay, well, I'm shooting a fashion picture. I mean, I didn't have the models and all of that. So in technicality, there weren't, but I was able to, in the series that you're going to see, shooting like my portraits of my family and stuff like that, I was able to take pictures that fused genres, because that's the way I see things, and that's what I like. I like the in between of the genres. So it's like I love doing portraiture, which I think is my base. And you know, I love the element of adding like a fashion spin to that, and then also a documentary aspect to it as well.
Sorry, I was muted. um,
Um,
Yeah, and one of the things I think that has been, people have described you as, and it's a term that you and I talked about when we talked, is there's this new phrase called a multi-potentialite. It's somebody who has their hand in a lot of different creative worlds that allow them
mhm.
to construct their create. And you've said of photography that it's just one of many tools for you. But I'm so curious, what do you think
Mhm.
photography does that's different from the other tools that you might have access to? What's like unique about it as a medium?
Right. Well, I think in the discussion that we were having, the point that I was really making was during that period of time, 2018 to 2019, when I was at home, I had to really sit with myself again and start to define who I wanted to be as a human being, first and foremost. Um, and really work on the within aspects of who I am, not the external, not the, you know, the external stuff, just like look at who I am on the inside. And I really came to the realization that for me, I'm a creative person, and a camera is a tool, and I'm not defined by the camera, nor am I necessarily defined by photography. Ultimately, my driving force is telling stories and using stories to create connection and to speak to different people from, you know, North Carolina, Egypt, or
Mhm.
wherever the story might resonate, or whoever it might resonate with. Um, with photography, I really liked, initially for me, the sort of draw to it was, at first it was a very much a power switch, because you know, switching from like being a model where there's no real power, and then like going behind the camera and having, you know, and doing that, for me it was like a power thing at first, but then it evolved into like, oh wow, it's powerful, and I realized the power that I can have to tell stories and to show people who haven't been seen, and to hear people through imagery. And I love the immediacy of photography. I love that. So I think that is why I'm doing photography right now, and that's like my focus at the moment. But it's my focus with the knowing that sometimes it's not going to be the only thing that I can use to get to express myself, and that's okay. Like if tomorrow I want to sit down and write a book, I'm going to sit down and write that book, knowing that, you know, it doesn't, like, I'm still a creative person.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a wonderful, sometimes the pressure on our single medium, right, gets so
Right.
intense, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I did feel that pressure. Like living in New York, I definitely felt at one point that I mean, like, it's your livelihood, right? So it's easy to be like, oh my God, I'm holding on to photography. I'm holding on to whatever my job is. I'm holding on to it. And sometimes that it can be very constricting, and it can like really stifle creative growth, because you're so, like you're so tightly wound, you know, like,
Mhm.
because you're just like, this is it, it has to happen, it has to happen. So I think once I step back and really define who I want to be as a person, and knowing that the bigger picture is telling a story and working from that point. And right now, what I have access to and what I like doing is, you know, photography.
Mhm. That's so great. And when you came back, you hadn't really
Hmm.
intended to photograph your family. Am I remembering that right? But it
Right.
became this really foundational and sort of grounding and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you'll talk about that more, how it sort of was the stepping stone
Right.
into your work that you did for your book. But would you like to talk a little bit about the movement into photographing your family, and then maybe even share some of those images with us?
Definitely. I think it's very interesting because so I started doing photography around 2013, and I came up to New York for 6 months on my like tourist visa, and I would do like testing with models, and so that was sort of like my training initially. And I would come home, but I would never shoot. And I used to feel, and again, this is when I was in that sort of mindset of, oh, I can only be a photographer if I'm shooting models, right? So like over that time, I was like, I would come home, but I never shot and I never felt inspired to shoot. But now, fast forward to like 2018, when I came home, and it was like a very uncertain time in my life, really. And that was when it was like, okay, well, you know what, I have to keep shooting. I have to, right? And it wasn't necessarily from a position of fear, but it came from a place of wanting to hold on to this, but not in a tightly wound way, but more so because I believed in myself and I believed that I had some talent, and I wanted to keep that flame burning.
Mm-hmm.
So I started, photographing my family because, well, it's who I had access to, and more so because I felt at the time like it was almost like therapy. I had like a lot of questions about my own life and then like how I got to where I'm at, and I wanted to really examine a lot of complex feelings and to put them into pictures. So that sort of like was the starting point of that. And when I started doing it, I think I explained this to you, which might sound crazy, but I would get like these flashes of ideas. And so I would get up and I would, go and make the picture, or sometimes the pictures would be there and I would kind of like slip into it. And I was really like digging deep within myself, and I was shooting in a different way. I was no longer like shooting from a surface level, but it was coming from something deeper. And I could feel that. And it was coming from, in some ways, again, it was like a therapeutic, it was some sort of release. It was some sort of grounding myself. And so that was like the sort of energy that I was, thinking of as I was shooting, like, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to find some peace within, and I'm going to use photography to do so. So the first sort of series that came out of that was Every Day is Another Chance. I have some images here that I'll share. One second. All right, can you guys see the screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you see it? Good.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So the project was, well, it's an ongoing series. I'm not sure when I'll ever finish, if I ever should finish. So this was a series that I started shooting at home, and it features my mother, my brother, and myself. Um, should I scroll through and then we talk if anyone has any questions, or how should I go about it?
Do it however you want. You can talk about each image as you go, or you can scroll through
Okay,
once and revisit, however feels good for you.
great. So I'll scroll through if I can scroll through. Okay, okay, good.
Mm.
All right. can I, do you have any questions about anything, or should I
Well,
just
yeah, go
continue?
back, just go back through the other way back to the beginning. They're so beautiful.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
So this is
How
my
was it?
mom.
I'm so
Hmm.
curious. How was it photographing your mom? Like, I know with our parents, you know, like you were saying
Right.
that there's a power differential, say when you're a model, but also within the
Hmm.
parent-child relationship.
Right.
How was this?
I think I slid off of this point I was trying to make earlier. For me, like I never thought that I would shoot. I never felt comfortable shooting people that I knew, even if it was like friends, because I always felt like there was a almost like a higher expectation that you would make them look a kind of way that they might think that they should look, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So there was always like an apprehension about shooting people that I knew. So again, to the theme of the night, which is stripping away, I had to get past that to start to take pictures of like my family. Um, I wouldn't say there was a power dynamic with shooting like my family. I think more so it was for me, from my perspective, it was seeing them because I hadn't seen them for 3 years. And things would have changed for me. And like I was thinking about the world in a different way. And I'm sure things might have changed for them, or they might have still think that I'm the same person or whatever. But it was more so about having some sense of connection. And I wanted to use the camera as a tool to connect with myself. Because you can see I'm featured. I like to say it's like a version of me in the pictures, because sometimes I don't really feel like there are portraits of me anymore.
Hmm.
Um, but it was more so using the camera as a tool to connect within, to see past, like mother or brother, to see something else.
Hmm. Hmm. We have a question from Daniela. I
Yes.
hope I'm pronouncing your name
Okay.
correctly. It says, hi, Kacey. For this series, do you plan each image or do you shoot as the day goes by without too much planning?
Right. So it's so interesting. Like I said, like the images came literally, they would come like flashes of, like for instance, this one, I remember this was probably this was the first one that I took.
Mm.
And I remember the day very vividly, and I remember exactly what I was feeling. I was in my old room and I was feeling like, I kind of felt like how I felt at a point when I was living here in Nevis, and I'd finished school, and I wasn't doing photography at the time. And there was like a feeling of not knowing my path in life. And I felt that I was sort of invoking that energy. So to the question, they weren't necessarily planned. Um, I would say a mixture, like this one, for instance, like my brother was in the room, I was there, and the camera was set up, and I know what I want the image to be. So it's like, well, I'm directing myself. And he's there, and I didn't really give him any direction. So I kind of knew what the scene would look like or whatever. And so it was the only control I really had was over the taking of the picture and what my expression would have been. This one, it wasn't planned. Like she was just sweeping, and I happened to have my camera, and I think at the time I think this was with my zoom lens or something, and she was just walking back and forth, and I decided this was the picture. This one would have been somewhat planned. She was in the kitchen and she's cooking soup, and she tasted the soup, and I was there and I was taking picture. Um, this might have been the more planned one, if anything. With this image, for instance, again, if I'm like photographing myself, it's a bit, I'm trying to articulate it. so the conversation is like very a one-way thing, you know, like I'm in front of the camera and I'm behind it. And because I'm in both roles, the any sort of discussion, you know, there's no discussion. It's like I know what it's going to be. And this one was again a feeling where I remember these ties are from when I worked at a bank when I had finished school, and I saw them, and just I was just thinking about like how I felt at that time. Again, this was before I would have started photography or even really thought of myself as a creative person. And so I was very much evoking what I felt during that period of being in my life, and what I guess being back home would have triggered, where, you know, it was a very uncertain time, and feelings of like, oh my God, am I going to go back to this? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you too for, I forgot to mention, those of you that want to ask questions, if you look at the bottom bar below the screen, there's a chat box and you can click on that. You can type in your questions. There's also, if you click on the participants tab, you'll see at the bottom of that window when it pops up, there's also a way to raise your hand if you prefer to vocally ask your question. I'm happy for you to engage either way. So thank y'all for the questions that you send.
I'm afraid to like click the question thing because I don't want it to like the whole screen to disappear. So I'm not sure.
No, you don't worry about it. I will alert you if there's a question,
Okay.
or I'll read the ones that come in, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So talk a little bit more about how that first initial shooting of your family
Mm-hmm.
created that transition to the new work, and your
Mm-hmm.
incredible book, by the way. If we provided a link when we sent out when we did the announcement for this talk, but Kacey has a debut book called Uniform, and it's stalled a little bit right now, right? You can't ship them, but they're there
Right.
and printed and ready.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
have one here.
let's see it. It's beautiful.
Bring that up, the slideshow. I have some pictures
Yeah,
from that
yeah, that's
eventually.
great.
But
Yeah.
so, you know, again, this being in this space of now realizing that, hey, I'm talented, I'm affirming my talent. And it's not coming from an external source necessarily, it's more an internal affirmation of like, hey, I'm taking these pictures, and again, I am going someplace deeper within myself to create these images, and it's not coming from a surface space. So that really, because I had done this and gone through, like, you know, showing like my family, and very, in some ways, being vulnerable, that really, I think, opened my mind as to the kind of how deeper I could go. Like it sort of expanded my own sense of where I can go as an artist, and if I can even start calling myself an artist. Like, how dare me, Kacey from Nevis, call himself an artist, right? So that really like expanded my sort of I guess field or whatever. And it was because I was at home now and I wanted to also do this project. And this project, Uniform, which I'm going to share. Should I take these off the screen, or should we
Yeah, yeah.
continue?
You could, if you want to switch to the other portfolio, that'd be great. Well, let's just
Okay.
pause a second. I didn't know if I left
Mhm.
enough time. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask about this first body of work? Anything? Okay, yeah, let's move
Okay.
forward to the next.
Stop share. We are learning, guys. We are learning how to use this. It is a process. All right. So this is the book. Are you seeing the screen or are
Yes.
you
Hmm.
okay? All right. So, being in that mind frame now where I feel like I have because I felt empowered by the personal work that I was working creating, and I really started to dig deeper and think now, okay, I want to do a book, and I felt I've always wanted to do a book. Um, I would go to when I was in New York. Being in New York really expanded my sort of idea of what was possible, and whether it was going to like art galleries and stuff like that, and going to like the book fairs and stuff, and just like being there and seeing the reaction that people would have to books. And I didn't at the time think like I'll have one now, but I felt like I was there, and I was sort of soaking up that energy of what the book meant and what a book can do. And so it was always in my mind that I want to do a book. And it was like, okay, how do I don't have an idea now, but as I was home and I started thinking and being in that space of you know um, that space of ease, really, and that's like a lightness. I started to think about, okay, what can I do that only I can do because I have access to something, and what can that project be that can like touch on, that I can shoot and that can feel like me, and what can I do to sort of show the world in some ways, and even really show myself that I am talented. And it always goes back to that. And I think we discussed this when we spoke earlier, where it was like, when you come into the game and you're self-taught, you come in with a lot of anxieties sometimes. And I, I'm not sure if that is your feeling, Susan, but
Hmm. Yeah.
you come in with like anxieties, which is only natural, where it's like maybe you feel like one has to work 10 times as hard to prove yourself or whatever. So I had like some of those chips on my shoulder, but it's like I believe in myself. I believe in myself, and out of all of that, the idea for uniform came, and I started thinking, and I ended up with, oh, I'm gonna do, like, what if I did portraits of school kids in their uniforms? Number one, it touches on a fashion aspect. Number two, I'll shoot it, and it'll feel like a documentary project. And ultimately, it's rooted in what I really love the most, which is portraiture. So that was the idea for this. Is how it started, how it was born. So the idea came about like October 2018, and then it took a while for me to get like permission and get the sort of ducks in a row, and I shot it in July. So between October and July, I thought about it a lot, and I was telling Susan that I think I had thought about it so much that by the time I was ready to shoot it, it had been within my skin for so long that I knew on instinct what the images would be like. And to be honest, the book literally made itself. Like the images made themselves.
Mm.
Um, so if I go through, this is the cover. It was designed by this guy that I had met. It's so funny. This is how things align. I had met this designer, an art director designer, somewhere in New York at some book thing or something. And I was like, I think we're going to work together or whatever. And so he was the first person I reached out to when I got the idea about doing this, Brian Kanagaki. And he brought on his friend, Adam Ridgway. They're both designers. So this is the cover, and I'll go through the work, have a look.
Mm.
This was the first day that I shot, actually. What was very interesting was you know, going to the first school, and, you know, it's like when you're doing the first thing, like I went by myself, I didn't have a reflector, I didn't have anything, it was just me and my camera. And you go and it's like the person is the first and you're their first person who's like photographing them in that kind of way. And it was very interesting, but the kids were like very open to the idea and they were very cooperative. And I felt like more than anything that the project really was a collaboration. And this is the first image. This would have been, this is one of my neighbors actually. He was featured. So this would have been my school back in the day, my uniform, like a yellow shirt and a khaki pants. This is another school. What was interesting, so I shot the series over 2 weeks. So I would do, I ended up there, I think there are 16 schools on the island that you know, primary school and high school. And then we also, because we have a British system, so you have like sixth form college. And that is like the last 2 years of the American system. So I shot 15 schools or 14 schools. So what I would do over the course of 2 weeks, because this was the end of the school year in last July. So some of the schools were having, you know, like graduations and stuff like that. So I had to be really flexible and really quick. And I really love, like, I love shoot. Anyone who has shot with me knows that I shoot really, really fast. And I love that. So that is when I put on like my documentary cap and I'm just like, go in and take the picture. So there's like a portrait like this, for instance, I went to the school, say like 11 a.m. and by maybe 11:30, quarter to 12, I would have finished. I would have taken the picture and start with the child and like would have spoke. Just because the book also has like their little quotes, so I would have spoken to them during the process. And this image, I remember this one very vividly because I felt this one on a deeper level when I took it. Mm-hmm. It was a morning and the sun was coming in. They were doing like playing around or whatever. And then I was shooting her and then I called the others over and they started running around. So that was like really fun.
Wow.
And this was back at my old high school. I had met April. So all the kids are Nivision and, you know, like we're a small island of like 12,000. But I had met April, this young lady here at where did I meet her? I met her at, I was asked to come and speak to some kids about photography. We're a small island and unfortunately, like creative arts aren't necessarily first choice occupations because there's really no precedent for that. Most people, you know, it's like a very traditional system where it's like you go to school and the hope is that you be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or whatever, something a very traditional role. So I had met her and she was like the only one and they had asked me to come and speak to them. So she was like my only pupil who I was speaking to. And, you know, I was like very impressed with her. So I asked her to be in the project. But I think for the most part with this project, all the kids that are here, I had no idea of what I was turning up to. You know, like I didn't know, like, and I kind of love that. That really made me feel good. Not knowing of who the child is, what the situation is going to be like. You know, I didn't go and scout anything beforehand. I just went and with my camera, no reflector, no assistant, nothing. I just spent like 2 minutes, walked around, said, okay, I'm going to shoot against this wall, you know, looking at the clothes. And now I'm like applying like my fashion eye. I'm like, okay, so she's like wearing a brown blouse or whatever. I think it would look really good if it's against that blue, you know? So I'm like, I love shifting between these genres and not feeling, you know, boxed in.
Marie has a question. Was it difficult or easy to get access to the students?
Well, it wasn't difficult. I met with the Department of Education and I spoke to them and I told them the goal of the project and what my intentions were, and it's going to be in a book. And at first I felt there was some resistance, but that didn't like hinder anything. The resistance was more like it's the school is going to end, and it's like we don't want to do one more thing. you know but it was easy. It was smooth sailing from that, and then eventually everyone came on board. And then when I shot the first girl at the first school, I showed the principal the picture, and I was like, okay, so you need to tell the others that I'm like, these are what the pictures are looking like. And she was like, yeah, yeah. So she, she WhatsApped the others, and that, helped the situation. And I would have gotten like permission from the parents, so the schools would have gotten the permissions and whatnot. Are you guys still there? Hello?
We're here. They're
Oh,
great.
okay.
Yeah,
Because
thank
I'm
you.
not seeing this. I'm not seeing anyone else. So I'm like, okay, wait.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So this like, so I was taking Jalik, this is the name of the student. I was making his portrait while this little one here decided to lift the thing up at the exact moment, and I was like, that's the shot. This would have been like my old sixth form. And so I remember going to sixth form, and I used to sit like right here. They're no longer using this building. They've since moved on to like a different building. But I remember the morning when I turned up to shoot, I was like, okay, I want to shoot someone here, because I just remember going to sixth form and sitting in that same spot. And I could remember how the light used to come in, and I used to always like gaze out the window. So I was like, I think this would make a really good spot to make a portrait. And this is one of my favorites. This is Thane. And we shot this again, it was very quick. I looked around the school. I had not been to the school before. I had not met anyone before. I just turned up and I was like, oh, I think this would make an interesting, it's like a very instinctual thing for me. And it could be because I had sat with the project for so long and I had already internalized it. So I knew what it would feel like and what it would look like. And that's what that's my approach. I think about, I want it to feel a certain way. And maybe again, this goes back to, because I'm self-taught, I'm not really um, burdened, I feel, by working out like the lighting and all these things. Like my thing is, okay, how can I tell the story, and how do I want to feel, and how do I want the viewer to feel? So that's like my sort of, you know, the way that I go through the process. Mm-hmm. Is there a
Yeah,
question? I'm
there's,
seeing the.
well, let's see. Yeah. So Leslie Price was saying, I'll talk to you at the end. I went to school in the English system. Do you still have prefix and a head boy or girl?
Well, I'm not sure about now, but I remember when I'm 31, so I would have been in school like what, 15 years ago or whatever. So I remember when I was in school, we did have like prefects. I don't recall like a head boy or whatever, but I remember prefects.
Hmm.
I'm sure they still do, probably.
I'm so curious, Kacey. So your book is
Hmm.
there and it's come back to the island, and have the children seen it, and what are their responses? How does it feel for them to be, to see
Right,
themselves celebrated in this way?
right. So I think the most parts the kids would have seen it online because the physical, they haven't gotten the physical copies as yet.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna start doing that soon. But they would have seen it, like the parents have spoken to some of the parents, and it's like, hey, I shot your daughter. And they're like, yeah, that was so long ago. I didn't even remember until like people started to tell me that my daughter is on Vogue.com or something.
Mm-hmm.
um,
That's so cool.
so I know.
Yeah.
So, like the parents, I've spoken to a few and they're like, wow, and I think the greater, when I was shooting it, like they knew that it was for a book, and a few of them were like, oh, wow, I'm going to be in a book or whatever. But, at that age, you're not really thinking, I guess you don't have the experience or whatever to really grasp the importance of what you're doing, what you represent in the world, and you're not necessarily able to see, yeah, the importance of it. And so yeah, I think eventually, right now we're also going through the whole COVID thing, and eventually I'm going to do like a book launch, and I want to do like an exhibition and stuff like that. So I
Mhm.
think that's when they're more amongst like their peers and whatnot,
Mhm.
and it's more like an island kind of celebration as opposed to like the bigger thing. I don't think they really get that as yet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
Mike has a question. Aside from the fashion aspect of the uniforms, what was the draw to photograph youth? And do the uniforms have any
Hmm.
connection to memory or social structure?
Right. So that's a good question. I think, well, whoa, what's that? um, so I think it wasn't a necessarily fashion first idea. A lot of things sort of came into the pot at once. Where it's like, okay, well, it could be fashion, it could be, it's showing something that is unique to not necessarily my island alone, but is something that is very unique and that is different. Um, and wait, I think I'm missing the question. I might need to hear it
Yeah,
again.
so it's just, do the uniforms have any connection to memory or
Right,
social structure? What was the
right,
draw to the uniform beyond the fashion piece? Why
right,
there?
right, 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 right. So definitely because it was personal as well, because I would have, grown up wearing a uniform. So that was like the personal thing, and even like the memory of what the uniform, wearing a uniform holds in our culture, where it's the norm first and foremost. But then within that, it's also like we're very much a society that is like presentation, like you want to go to school, everyone wants their child to look their best, no matter if you're rich or you're poor, you want your child to look their best. And in some ways that is displayed, how you carry yourself when you wear your uniform. um so yeah, and definitely memory, because it brought back memories for me as I was going through my own process of, looking within myself and trying to understand who I was on a deeper level, and having to confront memories from childhood. Um, so what was interesting was throughout the process, going and speaking to the kids and really hearing their views on life, really put
Mhm.
into perspective chunks of my memory in some ways, that things that I didn't think about anymore, or feelings that I didn't necessarily have the capacity to have the words to put into how I was feeling as a child. um, they sort of filled it in some ways. So yeah, it was like an amalgamation of different things.
And Casey, I've also heard you mention in interviews that this was what you called a presence first project.
Hmm.
Um, can you say a little bit more about that? Why you wanted that? Why you
Right.
say that? Yeah.
Well, I think, I can remember growing up here, and I remember when you know, you look through magazines like National Geographic and stuff like that, and you see the way in which, you know, Black people were depicted. And that would have been like, you know, the foundation in some ways of photography, because, you know, that magazine has been around for a long time. And I was very much clear in my mind that the bigger picture of this was, you know, it's within me and I feel the story, and I want to create a space where young Black kids or ethnic kids, because not everyone is Black in the series, but ethnic kids could see themselves. But at the same time, I'm very much aware that once the project leaves me, I don't really have much control over it. But what I can do from my end was to really go into it with the intention of not with the intention of seeing beyond, like, okay, these are Black kids or these are brown kids, right? And to think of something deeper than skin deep. In a way, like, I really, like, for me, it's about the presence. And I wanted to not shoot them as Black kids, brown kids, but to, or even kids, as a matter of fact. I was thinking presence. Who is this person? What's going on inside of this child, you know? And I wanted to, like, really sort of visually translate that, and to not make it a political thing or anything like that. Because that is something, having lived here in Nevis and then having moved to the US, in some ways I find myself often between, you know, between worlds in some ways. First growing up in a majority Black country, and then going into the US where I'm in the minority, and the whole, you know, a lot of complications, you know, race complications, or complications arising out of racial tensions and whatnot in the US. So I'm very much clear in my mind of, okay, it has to be a presence first project where it's deeper than, okay, this is who they are on the surface. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
That's great. I see Lydia has raised her hand, and then we have a couple other questions. Lydia, did you want to unmute and ask?
Thanks. Hi. Hi, this is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask if you could advance through these images. There's there's a young woman kind of leaning on a table.
Right.
This one, and the one right after this one too. These two specifically.
Right.
Both of these have such a an editorial couture fashion
right
goes to them, and also the color palette is just so arresting, with the bright yellow too, and I'm wondering, this is why I wanted to talk, not type it out. Sorry, I'm going to go in a little circle here. So you're coming to photography without the formal training, which often that we have to keep editorial work and documentary or photojournalist or artwork separate, right? So do you think that you're having your fingers in kind of all of those worlds, and as a subject yourself, allows you to break the rules of like fact and fiction by taking those like editorial liberties with your models, but also still truth telling? Do you see where I'm going with this? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And the answer is yes, definitely. I feel, and again, this reckoning in some ways would have come once I was at home and sitting with myself and really thinking about who I want to be and what I want to be. I'm like, well, why am I putting myself in a box? You know? Because I think there's so many things that can make a photograph, you know, and at any point in time within the interaction of making someone's portrait, I think there's so much shifting, right? So it's like, okay, well, am I going to stop because she's like posing like this and suddenly it can become a fashion picture? Am I going to continue and make the picture, right? So I definitely do feel a sense of freedom because I I don't have to put myself in a box, and that has opened me up to be more fearless in, you know, creating. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I guess I'm also wondering how much direction and coaching you're giving.
Right.
When, like, do
Mm-hmm.
you encourage this kind of thing, or do you say, oh, you look too much like a model, be more relaxed or something?
Right. So what I normally, even when I'm shooting models, I would always tell, and they can tell you, like when I've shot, I'm like always, you know, don't model, don't. Just give something real, yeah? So with these two images, Chanelly, so she was one of the girls that I would have chosen. So I met her, I was part of a panel for, it's called the 50 Most Remarkable Teens in the Island, within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And so I met her, and she had such a really compelling story, which is in the book, but the brief of it was, you know, her mom had died, and she had to do her exams, and she was speaking about how she overcame that. And she was dancing one time, and as a dancer, she was doing this performance to a song called Skyscrapers, and she was explaining to me that when she danced and she did this move, that she felt as if something like a dark cloud had been lifted, you know, during that process. So this was that. So it's not, it's posed, yes, but it's not me putting her in a pose, because she's a dancer and she very well knew how to move. Yeah, so that's all her really. And I liked it. And I felt, although it's posed, what I like about it was that there's still a presence there. But then if you look, like when I look closer into the image, I feel like she's so disengaged with me. So then it shifts again, and it feels like I'm observing something. That's how I feel. I'm not sure if that's what you're interpreting it as, but that's what I felt. It didn't feel like contrived, you know.
Yeah.
In the moment, at least, it didn't. It felt like, and because I know the backstory too, you know, it felt more natural. With this one, so we went into like this abandoned classroom, and the desk was there, and as you can see here, like it's not necessarily straight because it's like the foot in here is broken and it's like propped up. And she literally just, I was like, okay, well, why don't you just lean here, you know? And that was the image. Like she did that, and that was it. So obviously there is an element of pose to it, but I think there's also like a looseness to it, like in the expression in the face and like the hands. It's like something feels loose about it. So it doesn't feel, well, at least in the moment, I'm like referencing the moments of shooting it, it didn't feel like too posed, because I think I'm always the first person to be like, okay, you're posing, stop it.
Thank you for breaking that down. Those two were like the two that really kind of got me.
Mm-hmm.
So really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for loving them.
Yeah. And Nicole also said that shot is so great. So I wanted to share her comment. And then
Thank you,
backing up a
Nicole.
little bit, which I think you already spoke to,
Mm-hmm.
Bruce had asked, I see a strong relationship between your school portraiture and your fashion shots with models. What relationship do you acknowledge or see with those two realms? So I don't know if you wanted to say any more about that. I think you have spoke to that already.
I think, well, I think like for me, again, it's always like presence, and even with the photography models, like sometimes it's a bit harder to like with models, because that is their occupation, and then everyone has their own idea of what a model should be doing or whatever. But I've learned that this is what I like and this is what I want, and like models would generally cooperate and give me that. So yeah, I think that's like the similarity, you know, it's about the presence. Like a really good model has presence, right? And they're able to like draw you in beyond the sort of surfaceness And then again, depends on like the photographer and the image that they're intending to make. But I think ultimately it's about presence all across the boards for me, especially when, you know, doing that kind of, in that kind of space, like portraiture.
And Yvonne asked a little bit more, if you'd speak a little bit more to the text portion of your book.
Oh yeah. I could read some. How about that?
That'd be
You're getting
great.
a reading.
Yeah, especially if you have the photograph up of the person who's
Right, I
going
could
to
do
read.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me find, since we loved Chanel, I'll read hers. So in the book, there is on the what side is that? The left side. All the images are on the right and the text is on the left. So it has the student's first name as well as the school. That's the title of the image. So with Chanel, she says, last year for my annual dance production, I performed to a song called Skyscraper. I felt a deep connection with this song since my mom had recently passed and I was rising from a dark space. People are constantly asking me, how are you making it through? The answer is simple. I use my mom as motivation. Life can be unfair, but we just have to push forward and remember that there are better days ahead.
Mm.
So that was hers. What else do we have? Let's find a, oh, I like hers. So this is, she is the first one in the book and her name is Anaya. She's 10 years old and she attends the Joycelyn Library Primary School. I was really impressed with her, especially. She was like the first one. And like, I found her to be so mature for 10. I was like, are you sure you're 10? So she says, my friends think that I'm very comforting. When they're feeling depressed, I tell them to not let anything get under their skin. My grandma gives me courage. She says, don't worry about bullies. You will elevate. One thing I like about myself is the gap between my teeth. I think it is very unique to me. Being a Black woman, I feel that I can do anything. Black women are beautiful, proud, and strong.
Mm.
I was like, what? You're 10?
I know. Wow.
This portrait is one of my favorites. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but this is one of my favorites, if not the favorite. I remember this is Aquila, and she is what, 11, I think. I remember shooting her, and again, like she just had this presence just there. And we went up to this spot in the school, and it was just she and I there, and we were taking pictures, and she was just so present and so mature. I felt like she was just giving something that not even adults, a lot of the time you shoot like adults, that they would give. There was like a freedom, you know. I felt like a sense of, I know who I am from her. You know, the way she's looking directly at me, I was like, whoa, I felt that image. Do we have some questions? I'm seeing like the
Yeah, so
thing.
Nicole said that some of these portraits feel so 3D.
In what way, Nicole?
She might type to us.
I can't quite put my finger on it, but this portrait on the screen now, it feels almost like a pop-up. Like I can
I don't
reach
know.
behind. It's like beyond lens depth. It's amazing.
Now when I look at it, I see what you mean. I guess
Yeah,
it's her gaze is so commanding. Her
yeah.
eyes are just like drawing you in. So there's like an elimination of what you would expect a camera lens to create, I feel. I see it.
Amazing.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, you're touching on something, Kacey, which is does the subject's present almost bring them into, you know, but when Nicole says the word 3D, I think of it almost as embodiment, you know, as being fleshed out in some way.
Right.
And
right.
there may be, I mean, certainly this beautiful way that you work with color and space contributes to that, of course.
Right.
And I do think what you're saying about the quality of presence of the subject sort of embodies them within that space that you're photographing in. It's quite lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, for me, again, it's like having an intention when I'm shooting. And what is something that is very important for me is to have the image breathe. So I think that is what is translating in some ways, that element of the person, you know, we know it's like a photograph and we know all of that, but it's like, how can it breathe, you know? And as you can see, it's like the subjects aren't doing anything crazy, right? They're not like moving, like jumping around or anything like that. There's a very much an elegance, you know, like they're holding themselves in a kind of way. But still, for me, it's important for there to be like some sense of it breathing, like the image is breathing, or the person is breathing.
Mike has asked us questions about publishing the work. I know that you had shared with me that it was self-published and there was a really good reason that you chose that route over other routes. Can you speak to a little bit about the process of publishing this work and the choices that you made around how the book was created?
Right. Well, I think the first thing was, you know, thinking like, okay, well, I want to do a book. And then it's like, well, I have to then take the idea to someone at a publishing house or whatever. And it's like my first book. And I'm, you know, and then it's like I didn't have the work first to show that, okay, this is it. Right. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. And I'm very much like that. I'm like, you know what? If I can do something myself, whether it's a book, a gallery show, or whatever it is, I'm going to find a way to do it. And so that would have been like my mindset. So I did the research and I found out, you know, like printers and stuff like that. And things just came into place. And yeah, that was more so like the mindset with my reason to self-publish. And two, I'm at a stage where for me, it's about, again, bringing things on an internal where it's like, okay, well, I want to build my own platform and I want to, you know, like a publisher would have been great, but it's like, at some point I have to step up and do my own thing. And this is a good start. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the business of all of this, right, is complicated, and
Right.
you did such an amazing job. I mean, it's one thing to self-publish a book, it's another thing for that book to be celebrated, right, in the world.
Right.
And we've noticed that Vogue, that what I find really fascinating about this book is it's being celebrated across genres. So Vogue
Right.
is excited to see it, and then the British Journal of Photography, you know, so
Right.
like these amazing range of people that are interacting with the book and finding something in it for them, that
Right.
you have crossed over lines that a lot of photographers don't get to cross over.
Yeah, and again, it's about the intention, and it's about having an awareness of this is the kind of photographer I want to be, you know, where it's like I could shoot, you know, I see fashion everywhere. I see something to be documented everywhere. I see a portrait everywhere. So why not do things that really, you know, embody that sort of nuanced space? So yeah, and I think, again, what's so beautiful about this project is that you might not have gone to a school that wears uniform. You might not have even heard of Nevis before. You might not have even heard of Kacey Jeffers before. But the work stands for itself, and it speaks to people across the world, you know, because everyone at some point would have gone to school. And I looked at it as, you know, I really wanted each student to feel like a different person, because the reality is each one is a different person. So I really wanted that to resonate. And it's like the totality of the book, it makes one person, it makes no one, and it is everyone. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's just how I think about it. Like, you know, it's everyone. There's something for everyone. That sense of nostalgia, that sense of this could have been me in school, you know, that could have been someone, that could have been someone, that could have been someone's cousin, you know. So it's just, that's just what I thought about, you know, during the process.
And I could ask a million more questions, but I just want to open it up. Is there anyone else that's got
So
some
I would
questions?
love to ask some questions.
Sure.
Thank you. So I grew
I
up in
can't
South
see
Africa.
everyone. Hello.
Hi. So I grew up in South Africa on the very, very English side of South Africa, because it was very divided between the black, the Afrikaans and the white. And
Mhm.
schools were very, very English in those days. And I still see this similarity, even though I'm sure that they're so much more advanced than how we went to school.
Mhm.
And so do you notice a big difference between those children growing up with an English education compared to the children here in the United States, where life is much freer and not seem so, school used to be very harsh in those days. And I'm wondering if it's still like that.
Are you saying that life is freer because they're not wearing uniforms?
No, because the whole education system is so totally, totally different.
Okay, gotcha.
It's like chalk and cheese. You're not, you know.
Right. Well, I'm not too. Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm saying like we had 7 subjects, each subject
Right.
a year. School was, you know, the children here seem so much happier than when we went to school, I have to admit. But, you know, they used to look at your nails, and if your uniforms weren't the right height above your knee,
Right.
punished,
I get that.
right lines,
So,
and things like that, you know.
So I can definitely relate to what you're saying, because from my own experience, I mean, I can't speak to now because I'm not in school now, but from my own experience growing up within that English system, you know, it was there was some level of strictness to it, where it's like, okay, you can't go to school with your hair not cut, or your hair has to be cut a certain way, or you have to wear black shoes, you can't wear white shoes,
or a blazer. In the middle of summer, you had to wear a blazer in the heat.
Well, we didn't. I mean, like, we never wore blazers. That's just cruel if you're from the Caribbean. But yeah, so I do identify with what you're saying with the strictness surrounding the uniform. But again, it's like and I was speaking to Susan about this, where it's like I am in that space, and it has always been that, and I've always known that, right? So I never had like a point of reference to see anything different. The only thing was, like, as a child, when you turn on the TV and you look at American high school, you're like, oh wow, they do this and they do that on whatever TV show you're watching. But you know, that is like maybe even so far removed from actual school.
When did you get television as a growing up in Nevis?
Yeah, I mean, television had been around, I would say maybe the 80s, 70s, 80s. I think people would have had TV. Like, I grew up in the 90s, and we would have had access to cable and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, we never had television until my children were 5 and 3, and so I grew up completely without any television. But doesn't do me any harm. But anyway, I love the children. I love the uniforms, and well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. So I think again, I've been asked this question, where it's like the subject of the uniform, almost as if, how should I explain it? Like, for me, it's, again, I've grown up in it my whole life. So being outside of it, it's only when I'm now an adult and I'm doing this kind of project where I can see the 360 of it, where I can understand, like, okay, in America people don't wear uniforms, so you know the structure surrounding that might be different, where you can turn up to school in like your jeans and whatnot, and there might be less regulations. But here it's like you're wearing a uniform and you can't do certain things I mean, like everyone's here being obedient and nice and coming to school well dressed and not, doing crazy things. But I remember that for sure, being in school where there's a specific, it's a uniform and the accessories have to be a certain way, basically. Is anyone there?
I was noticing Nicole's
Uh,
child watching the photos. Hi, Nicole. It's lovely. We see people's family life when we're looking. Okay. Well, do we have any other questions that are queued up? If not, I have a couple more, and we're of course winding down towards the tail end. So, Kacey, the questions I have, this is this sort of minutia. We don't get into it unless we have a few minutes left, because it's, maybe not interesting to everyone. But, book design, right? It's its own beautiful craft. And do you mind if I ask you like a little bit about the technical choices of how the book
Right.
came into
Sure.
design? Is that okay? Well, I'm noticing the format of the images look like 4x5, and
Right.
I thought you had shared with me that this was captured digitally.
Yes,
Is that
but
correct?
they're all cropped into a 4x5.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful and amazing choice. Why that particular size? What did that mean for you?
Honestly, like, I just thought it looked better.
It's lovely. I just love it. I
There's
didn't
no
know if
deep
it was
thing
because it
about
was
it.
like the traditional size. We think about that as almost the
No.
original format of film in a way.
I just thought it looks so much more elegant.
Yeah,
Because
it's
the book is
beautiful.
8x10. Okay, so if we want to flesh that out a bit, I wanted the book to be, again, I had thought about it for like a good 10 months or whatever. And I wanted the book to be small. It's only 56 pages. I wanted it to be small, humble, but packs a punch, right? So, and I didn't want it to be about me, and I wanted the pictures to really resonate. So I tried to remove myself as much as I can. Not just physically, but physically I'm present, but I just wanted to remove myself, and not make it like I'm going to do a big book kind of thing. I was like, okay, I want it to be 8x10 because that's easy to get around with. Like, I'm thinking more like commercial. I'm like, okay, this is easy to, if you buy it, it's easy to transport. If you came to need this site, you bought it and you're traveling, it's easy. But I also like the size of a 4x5 sort of. I like the crop. It just looks much better, I think, for
Yeah,
this project.
it reminds me when I was in school. Do you remember those little children's reader books? And we would get them. They were hard covered, and they were about that size.
Right.
And that it almost
So I was
yeah.
also thinking about like an exercise book, like a textbook.
Yeah.
So I was definitely thinking along that lines as well. So if you look at like the design of it now, the first choice for the cover, I'm going to give you guys some secrets.
Secrets.
The first choice when I shot this image, honestly, like, I felt like this would have been the cover. I don't know, it was just like a feeling, but I started thinking and I ended up with this because this for me felt so much more universal, and it's I liked that, what I liked about her, and to tie in what the lady from South Africa, who was that
Leslie.
again? Leslie?
Leslie.
Yes. To tie in what Leslie was speaking about, like the sort of strictness, I wanted a cover that sort of felt subversive and felt anti that. So that is why she's on the cover and she's like blowing her gum, because in our culture, it's like, you know, if you're in school, that is not something you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So that is why I chose that image, because I felt like it had the essence of the project, where it's like the uniform is being shown beautifully, and it stands out against the, you know, it's a cloth cover, so it stands out against that. And I just love the colors and how everything worked in that image and worked within the context of the story that I was trying to tell, like the eye contact, and again that sense of presence, where she could be anyone, regardless of race, creed, class, gender, whatever. It's just like an emotion, something that is being conveyed. Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
fantastic. Yeah.
to go further into the design of it, do you have any specific questions, or should I
No,
continue?
this is fantastic. And yeah, we've still got you know, we've still probably got a good 10 minutes. So would
Oh,
love
okay.
to hear more. And of course, folks, put your questions in the chat window or raise your hand, and happy to
Yeah.
take any other questions.
So I had the guys, Brian and Adam, and we would go back and forth. And for me, because I'm not, again, this is what, you know, I've never done a book before. I didn't know a lot of things, so I was kind of like making it up as I went along. The images that were shot, there are 26 portraits in the book, and it's basically in the order of how it was shot. And I felt like the book just made itself, really. But what I was telling, so I went to the guys and I would say, for instance, like, okay, I want it to feel like this, you know, and then they would like translate what I was describing into the design. I would say like, okay, I want the text to feel, I want it to be intimate. I don't want it to feel boastful. I want it to feel very humble. I want it to feel, I want the image to really resonate and stand out on the cover. So I would use more like descriptions to get across like what I wanted. With the color now, it's like a beige kind of color. The cloth, that is. And it's, for me, it was like, okay, how can I give the book visual weight, if that translates to you guys? Because the book is 56 pages, so it's not really heavy, but I wanted to give it a sense of like visual weight. And also to take like the khaki from the men's, the pants, the khaki pants that the guys would wear. For like most of the schools, like the males would wear khaki pants along with their shirt, colored shirts. So I wanted that to be symbolic of, okay, this is like the male part and this is like the female part. So like that was like the masculine and the feminine kind of mix. So that was like the choice for me, the reason behind the choice of the color of the cloth. And then I wanted Nevis to be on it, so people would know that it's from Nevis, and people would say, "Oh, where's Nevis?" I'm gonna look it up. And
Yeah. I love that you put I love that you put Nevis on there. I thought that was a
yeah, you
beautiful
know,
tribute to home.
yeah, it's more than that, really, and it's about like, you know, we're only 12,000 people, and again, like, not like, I came into knowing about my own creative essence like much later on in life, and I feel like even speaking to the kids, a lot of them have aspirations that are outside of the traditional box, just that they're not in a space where they're able to make the connection and to get to that point. And I felt like doing this project, you know, it's a project about visibility, and it's a project about seeing yourself ultimately. I never saw myself in books growing up. I didn't see anyone from Nevis. I didn't see anyone from Nevis being a photographer where I could be like, oh, wow, you know, when I grow up, I want to do that. So it was very important for me to want to do this book, so that could be something tangible that, you know, one of these kids who might see it, even if it's just one, they might be like, okay, wow, I'm in a book. You know what? Maybe I want to be a filmmaker. And if Kacey had a dream to do a book and he did it, then maybe I too can one day fulfill my dream and be a filmmaker or whatever that person wants to do. So it's about inspiration and seeing yourself. And, you know, we're a small island of like 12,000 people. And it's not every day that we get to be on, you know, Vogue.com, or we get to be featured in this kind of light, or even like the young people. It's not all the time that the young people get to be celebrated in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like it was so imperative to really do this and to hopefully have it mean something to someone.
That's so beautiful. Lydia, I see a hand raised, but I don't know if that was from before or from now. So if you've got another question, give us
No, that was from before.
Okay.
But I'll just say
It's like
thanks.
Thank you.
So beautiful, and everything you were just. I like want a sound bite of everything that you just said about representation for young people. And even the conversation that you and Leslie were having about education. I think that I'm hijacking now, but I think that the way that you talk about occupying the space between all of these categories, and not even just being outside of a box, but just kind of creating your own space that there are no boundaries. And then what Susan was saying about how that then is touching people in different fields and different ways is it's really inspiring. And yeah,
Thank you. I'm glad you're inspired. I mean, that's the purpose of doing all these things, these talks. And, you know, it's like, hopefully one person can walk away and feel inspired, and really, again, to touch, to, you know, segue to the theme of tonight, which is like stripping away the layers, and really just like, hey, you don't need to be in a box if you're creating. If you're a chef, you don't need to. If you're making a meal, you don't need to put whatever. You can just make up your own, and that's how I see it. And I think for me, that has really made me feel so much freer. And two, it's like the ideas now that I have, they are more expansive because I'm not like doubting them, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Lydia. I want to remind everyone, of course, that Kacey's book is for sale. And I am so excited. I'm ordering mine today. And we have put a link. We will post this talk online. We will also have links to the book. It's such a courageous and amazing thing when we self-publish, and it's not we have to raise all that money and take these amazing creative risks. And it's so important that we support each other in that process. And we're so grateful
Thank
that
you
you
so
took
much.
time to be here and to share your work with us. And especially, I want to reiterate that in this particular time, when we're all trying to find our way around, we're stumbling into new territory, we have this incredible opportunity. And I think the thing that Kacey brings to us in this talk is this understanding that we can break some of these rules right now. We're in this kind of time out of time, and that we can be inspired to jump tracks and switch genres and blend things together that we might not have felt like that we could in the past. And
Yeah.
I so appreciate your inspiration there. And if there's anything else you want to share in closing, would love to hear it.
Yeah, I definitely think, you know, I think we spoke about this, where for me, the only difference is that the world now is, you know, the collective, that we're going through like a pandemic, but I was sort of in this space already where it's like uncertain and all of that. And that really led to these two bodies of work, where it's like the family, and then now with this. I don't really see it as being separate, because had I not started shooting like my family, I would not have had the, I guess, emotional intelligence to really go deeper and do uniform. So I think now is the time where we can really dig deep inside ourselves as creatives, and to free ourselves from the pressure to do, right? But in doing so, starting to do, but from a space of authentically wanting to do, not because you're like afraid that you're not photographing, your clients or whatever are not calling you, or so you're going to just do something. But really sit with yourself and figure out, okay, what do I really, really, really want to do? And what are the stories that I really, really want to tell? Or even if you're a writer, what do I really, really want to write? And I think once you allow yourself to go through that, go through like a vulnerable place and really allow yourself to be exposed. If you're at home now and you're like depressed by all of this, tap into that. That is vital energy that you can tap into as a creative person. Take pictures of yourself looking depressed and work through your depression or whatever you're going through. You know, using your camera as a tool to really document that and just get yourself lighter. I think that is the thing, really. Find ways to allow yourself to feel lighter. It's not always hard, or it's not always easy to do, but I think ultimately the journey and the sort of walk that you have to walk is a valuable one. And I think once we shift our perspectives to thinking like, hey, this is valuable, then it doesn't matter if it's hard or easy. It's just valuable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's such a yeah. I needed to hear that for sure. We had one more comment from Marie. Let's see. Maybe in 20 years you could photograph the students again and record how their lives
Well,
evolved.
yeah,
And
so that is
and
interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
second
yeah.
part.
Yeah, and she said, and in what ways your inspiration helped them to fulfill their dreams? Because this book, right, is very much about
Hmm.
letting them talk about their dreams, and there is something about naming a dream that is almost like the first step towards that
Yes.
action.
Yeah.
And so she said that it's just a very beautiful project, and um,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
So what I think, well, what I love about photography and what I love to do with projects is to do projects that are open-ended. So like with this book, with the family, and even when I do fashion shoots and stuff like that, I think with an open-endedness to it, where it's like, okay, if I want to turn this into like a series, I can do that. So with this, I like the bigger picture of this for me, like on my wish list is to one day be able to do all the islands in the Caribbean. I think that would be so interesting. That might be like such a big book. Go to each island and then, you know, it's like uniform Kacey Jeffers, Barbados, uniform Kacey Jeffers, Antigua, Jamaica, and then do like something. I think that would be so interesting. I mean, that's very ambitious to do. But I think that would be something. But I think also on a smaller scale, I might revisit it, you know, a couple of years from now. It's like it's open-ended. It can be done 3 years from now. It can be done 10 years from now, because it's like a timeless story, you know, because this girl on the cover, she could have been somebody who I went to school with. It could have been somebody who my mother might have went to school with, you know. So
Mhm.
it's so timeless because the
Yeah.
uniforms aren't going anywhere.
Well, you know, what's amazing is part of the intimacy and size of the book that you've created. I could so easily see, because you've already gotten Nevis on the thing, that it would be so beautiful to see this box set, right?
Right.
And it reminds me of those books. I don't know if you're so much younger than me, but in the 70s, Time Life would come out with these series of books. They were all the same size, and they would often fit into this slipcase, which is also
Right.
how collectible National Geographics come.
Hmm.
So there's a kind of little throwback to that piece that you were talking
Yeah.
about disassembling that
Right.
that sort
Right.
of cultural history piece as well.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh,
definitely.
we could just go
I
on
know
all
we
night.
could.
I love this so much. And yeah, anybody else? And of course,
Can
Kacey, if
I
there's
stop
anything else
share
you
so
want
I
to
can
share.
like see people?
Yes,
I guess.
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like I've been like in a room by myself.
Can you see folks now?
I can see Hi Leslie.
Yeah, so if you want to see everyone, there's a trick. There's
Yeah, I
like a
can see
little grid.
everyone.
You can do the gallery view. Yeah. Yeah. It's great. And also, let me see, there's a new message popping up. People saying thank you, of course. And when you were talking about the self-portraiture, Melanie and a couple of other people were like, me too. It really struck a chord for lots of folks.
Yeah, I think it's like, you know what, and whatever you're going through, it's like you don't have to show anyone your pictures. You can just make them for you. It might lead to like the best work that you've ever done, I think. And I think it's so, the camera is such a powerful tool, and we know that from like the historical context of photography, that it has been around for so long and it has shown so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always like, you know, well, why not turn it and see yourself? Even if it's just like your physical self, it's like sometimes you know, you can only express certain things with yourself if you're looking at yourself,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
like, you know, the camera is good for that, I think. And you just never know. That might be your biggest series. And if you shoot still life, don't be afraid to shoot dogs or cats or whatever.
Yeah. And Frances is on the call. She is, we run practice
Hi,
groups,
Francis.
and she is doing our self-portraiture practice group. And so we've been enjoying her work. She does a very intimate and vulnerable and self-focused work through portraiture. And so I don't know if you're
I
still
would
here,
love to check it
Frances.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here, Susan.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi,
Yeah.
Francis.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about like using the camera as a powerful tool for self-reflection, because that's pretty much the cornerstone of my work and how I use photography. And I think it's something that can be very intimidating for people, because
Right.
confronting like you on your darkest day is very hard, but I think it's something that's such a valuable experience. So I'm glad that you also think that.
Yeah, and it's like once you take these pictures, I think after a while, like it leaves you, and that's how I feel about like even with my self portraits. Like when I say it doesn't feel like, it feels like a version of me, and it has left once it's suspended in time and it's like on, it's like tangible or whatever. It's like it's no longer there. I've stepped through that veil of fear and seen it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Nicole.
really.
Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, Nicole said for her, it's like a release.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the word, a release, indeed.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Francis, I think I interrupted you. Was there more?
Oh, no, I was just going to say pretty much a release, but like you can almost comprehend that moment a little bit clearer, or you can almost see it from a objective rather than a subjective.
Yes.
moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, and so you know, like for me, the next step with all of this was to do like an exhibition and all of that. And again, it's with the uniform is, you know, for the kids to see themselves, because I think that is so important as a young person, to see yourself in this way, in like a space that is like a gallery. Like we don't really have, well, we have a little gallery here, but it doesn't have like pictures and stuff like that. So even just the idea of walking into a room, whether it's like a whatever kind of room, and you're seeing pictures of you on like a 20 by 24 or whatever, and just what that could do to you on a psychological level, you know what I mean? And how that could like really shift your perception of your own self. And I think that is, so important. And even in a book, what a book represents, because it's like, again, we're from Nevis. It's a small island. You're not used to seeing anybody who you know in a book. You're not used to seeing anyone, who like online in that kind of way, in like for something good. Just like your physicality, but then it's also like you what you're bringing through that, what you're conveying through that, and how that is resonating with people, and how people, it was so moving, when someone, like a friend of mine, she's from Trinidad, but she lives in Toronto, and she wrote like, she was like, who knew that we could be art? And that was just like, whoa, that was deep.
Yeah.
And even when people from like New Zealand and wherever in the world, and they're like resonating, they're like impacted by the book, and it's just, I could have thought about all, how the book is going to feel and whatnot, but it's like one thing to have that sort of, I guess, confirm reassurance when someone says something like that and it means something to them. That is like a good reward in and of itself.
That's so great. Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. And I am so grateful that you took the time to be with us. And
Of course.
I always hate that these talks have to end, because I feel like sometimes it takes us, it takes a while to get in there deep, right? And
Right.
and then the time is up, and that's the worst. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we say goodbye for good for tonight. We have been doing this talk on Tuesday nights. We're taking a shift to Thursday. So if you've been marking out time on your calendar, please shift it forward to Thursday. We've gotten a lot of feedback that the Monday and Tuesday night back-to-back has been hard for some folks to do those 2 nights in a row. So our documentary talk will be making that shift to Thursday nights. If you're not already, we have a bunch of curators coming on board, and we'll invite Kacey, of course. One of the fun things that we do when somebody has been a speaker is we have this massive collection of images that have come in through our Life at 6 Feet hashtag. If you're not using it already, when you post any photographs to Instagram taken during this time, and again, we're not talking about photographs of a pandemic, we're talking about intimate and personal photographs taken from within this time. Please use the hashtag Life at 6 Feet, and we invite curators. Many of them are speakers from the past, if they agree that they want to do it, and they can look through that hashtag and through our submissions online and recommend photos for a gallery that will be a featured series of photographs of images that spoke to them personally. And we've got a number of other curators coming on, so if you haven't already used the hashtag and you haven't already submitted your photographs online, please do that. For those that have been submitting them since the first day, I know it feels like they've been sitting there a while without us interacting with them, but I promise you there's a lot happening behind the scenes that you're not seeing yet. So we have some really wonderful surprises coming up for how those photographs will be used. And this recording of this conversation will actually go up online. It usually takes us 3 or 4 days to get it posted. So if you want to share it with friends, you can. And we'll also provide a link to Kacey's book. And again, we're just so grateful that you were here. And thank you so much for your creativity and your wisdom and your beauty.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I had a great time. This is like my first Zoom thingy.
Well, we're glad we could be your first Zoom thingy. Great. Well, we wish everyone safe life while we're still navigating these crazy times. And we look forward to seeing you back here next week. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Kacey.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Have a great night.